How many of you are old enough to remember the black and white Superman show that began with that statement about truth, justice, and the American way? So it was the motto not only of Superman, but of Clark Kent, the reporter, the journalist. So I trained as a journalist. I was a journalist for most of my career. Journalism at its best is a search for the truth, anyways, for true stories. Doesn't always live up to that ideal, but that's the goal, or that's supposed to be the goal. So there's a whole branch of philosophy devoted to what is truth? What are verifiable facts? How do we know what we know? I'm more concerned with more practical aspects of, like, how do you run a democratic society when people don't know what to believe? In this era of fake truth and alternative facts. And of course, I could make this entire speech about Donald Trump. He's the big fat target at the center of this argument. But it's certainly broader than that. Now, let's try a few statements on you, and you tell me whether these are truth, whether these are facts. The world is round.
True.
The earth revolves around the sun. The average normal body temperature is 98.6. Fact? Well, it's been repeated as a fact for decades. There's a whole Freakonomics episode about how the science behind it was actually very flawed, and everybody actually has their own average body temperature. So if you measure it by modern science, well, maybe not so much of a fact. Donald Trump's inauguration crowd was record-setting, the largest in history.
Not fact.
Not fact, yeah. Verifiably not fact, but one of the big first whoppers of the administration. How about the average surface temperature of the Earth has increased by about 2 degrees Fahrenheit since the late 19th century.
True.
True, yeah, so there are records. Second half of the statement, this is from a NASA website. As a change largely driven by increased carbon dioxide and other human-made emissions into the atmosphere.
True.
True, or at least a very strong scientific consensus. But something about which there are these days Republican facts and Democratic facts, which is not necessarily helpful if you're trying to make public policy. If we can agree on the facts, then we can argue about the right solution to the problem. Is it a market-based solution, or is it a heavy government regulation solution to the problem? When we talk about untruths, fake news is the current term. Propaganda would be the older one, particularly for fake facts coming from the government or coming from the media. Probably the most famous and dangerous propagandists were the Nazis. One thing I didn't know before I started researching for this speech is that Nazi propaganda was actually in some ways a reaction to British propaganda from World War I. So the British had put out stories that were published in several supposedly reputable newspapers about German atrocities, German World War I atrocities, where the dead were being melted down, their fat was being made into soap. So the Germans decided we've got to have our own propaganda operation, and Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, used the fact that the British, who are now on the Allied side in World War II, had put out fake information previously to discredit news that was leaking out about the Holocaust. So obviously you can't believe anything these people say. That's the danger of truth being undermined, of the very notion of truth being undermined. I said I spent most of my career as a journalist. I'm currently working more as a marketing writer, and I'm reading Seth Godin's book, All Marketers Are Liars. He tried to clean that up a little bit in the second edition and say, well, all marketers tell stories. And one of the points he makes is that politicians who rely on the fact that their arguments are true, that their arguments are based on the facts, tend to lose to people who tell a better story. Now, we talk a lot in Toastmasters about telling stories as the way to engage people, as the way to make your point. So this is a skill that can be used for good or for evil. So think about that in terms of the messages that you convey. Think about the power you wield, and think as a consumer of news, of information, as a person who's sitting in the audience when you hear a speech that you're swept away by and inspired by. Is what you're hearing true? You need to have that skeptical mechanism turning over in your mind. Are they appealing to my prejudices, to the things that I want to believe are true? Because in the realm of fake news has largely been talked about in terms of what gets passed around on social media. And I made the mistake of sharing a headline about something stupid that Sarah Palin had said, except she hadn't actually said it. I believed that she could have said it. It appealed to my preconceived notions. The Nazis flattered their audience, certainly their German audience, by telling them you're the master race and all your problems are caused by somebody else. So think skeptically about what you're consuming as news, and please, please, recognize the value of the truth, of seeking the truth.